Hi folks, Slick Slices here. Now, I get a bit bored with YouTube these days. There's an awful lot of... Well, the algorithm requires that if you want to grow your channel, you have to put out a video every single day. The result of which is that the quality of videos does tend to slip. Rather than people having great ideas for videos, they tend to just churn something out because they've got to do something. And it means you get an awful lot of videos that are just dire. So I don't watch so many. Even some of my favourite YouTubers just get ignored. But I was trolling around last night, and there's one from Paddy Potato Peelers just caught my eye, and that was he was looking at his Royal Navy knives, and he was in the Royal Navy from I think 77 onwards. So I think our service probably crossed over, but I was in Naval Reserve from I think about 88. I think I joined. I'm not entirely certain, to be honest, but I got made redundant under options for change and put on the retired list, so I wasn't there a great deal of time, but I was during that time I was a sub-lieutenant. So I have a very nice blue suit and a sword as a result. But a long time prior to that, my father was in the Naval Reserve. He was a Killick in the R&R, and we were both at the same place, HMS Claverhouse, a concrete frigate in Grant and in Edinburgh. Concrete frigate being a shore establishment called HMS Claverhouse. It used to be the Claverhouse Hotel. But anyway, when I was about 8, we used to go sailing at we lived in a place called Dalgety Bay in Fife, where there was a really good sailing club. Still is actually a really good sailing club, and we used to go sailing. And 1974 I did my Royal Yachting Association dayboat certificate. My elder brother and I both did them, and I passed. So for my birthday, I got some money and I bought myself this knife for going sailing with. To be honest, they're not the best sailing knives in the world, but because they were what was issued by the Navy, as far as I was concerned at the time, that meant it had to be the best. So I think Paddy will tell you that's usually not true, but nonetheless it seemed to me true at the time. So I went there and I bought this, and I'm sure it cost me 87 pence. That's sort of a number that's been stuck in my head for the last 51 years. May not be true, but hey, why let the truth get in the way of a good story? Anyway, so I bought it. I was then licensed to go out in a boat on my own. In practice, I didn't generally. What we used to do, my brother and I would go down to the club on a Sunday, and assuming my dad wasn't sailing that day, we'd wander around with a life jacket under our arms and find somebody to crew for. Nobody worried either about health and safety or child protection issues. We just hopped in a boat with this complete stranger and went sailing up and down the Firth Forth, far from land, without any worries or concerns. Anyway, so we used to do that, and this is what I would carry as my sailor's knife, because a sailor needs a knife, and a marlin spike is a useful thing as well. So when I saw Paddy's video last night, it just sent me the thing. He was doing his Royal Navy knives. I don't have a collection of Royal Navy knives, but it just occurred to me that this knife is an interesting knife. I've had several of them since, but this one, my mother worked in a company called Highland Electronics on the Donnybristle estate in Dalgety Bay, and they had amongst other, they made circuit boards, but they had engraving machines, so she got it engraved with my name. And so, as I say, I've had several of these over the years. I had my father's, I don't know where that's gone. I certainly didn't sell it, but I don't know where it's gone. I've had a couple of others. I gave one to Tobias over in Knife Chats with Tobias. But this one has stuck with me for that entire period. Now, Paddy was saying he wore the blade out in his, and you would if you did something sort of, mad, like actually sharpening it. Oh, wow. I've forgotten how stiff the action was on these. Mind you, my fingers are probably just getting older and certainly weaker. Now, this one was made by Myson, Myson, nothing to do with the porcelain manufacturers in Dresden. This was our company in Sheffield. The pattern 21306 was consistent from 1938 right up until they stopped doing these in the 1980s. The only real change was prior to 1943 it had a copper bail, and from 1943 onwards they had a steel bail, and other than that the pattern never changed. The army ones changed as often as a soldier might change his underpants, once every few years, and but the navy one just didn't change. So it had a sheepfoot blade. As I say, mine survived mainly because I had no idea about sharpening it. I just let it get blunter and blunter and blunter, I seemed to be happy enough with it. I was a child at the time. You also have a marlin spike. Marlin spike is a useful thing for undoing knots and things. It's best if it's not sharp. A sharp marlin spike tends to get caught up in the fibres of rope, whereas if it's a little bit, you don't want it round, but if it's a little bit less sharp, it actually is easier to use. There's no lock on the marlin spike on these. In fact, there's barely even any spring tension to hold this one open. The other thing is you have a screwdriver. This is there are a couple of differentiations between the navy ones and all the army patterns. The navy ones have the screwdriver on the effectively the middle of the knife and under the bail. The army ones have it are generally three, not always, but generally 3-layer knives. They don't always have a marlin spike, but they generally have a knife blade and a bottle opener, can opener. That's really how you can tell it. They're not navy if they've got a can opener, because the navy don't really need can openers, because on ships you've got galleys and chefs and the like, whereas army people have to open tins and feed themselves. So the screwdriver's under the bail on this end. On an army one, they're invariably at this end, dividing on the divider between the blade and the can opener. But like I said, these are always single layer, and the screwdriver is part of the back spacer rather than the sort of middle web of the knife. These were made by any number of makers, but they're always the same. Anyway, it isn't the first knife I owned. It's possibly the first good quality knife that I owned, and I've certainly had this one for 51 years. So, and it's the same one. Now, I stopped using it probably in my early teens, because I started to generally use a sheath knife. A folding knife seemed like a good idea, but they never really are when you're doing anything really physical, like camping, scouting, cadets. It did see some use when I joined the R&R myself, because by that time they stopped issuing them. But I just had this sort of sentimental attachment to carrying this one, so I carried it for about 4 or 5 years. But it came out of my pocket about 4 or 5 times in 4 or 5 years. Never really got used for anything serious. But I just thought it just made me think about a couple of the other knives that I had around that time that have sort of survived. Oh, incidentally, this lanyard is not the original, not by any shot. I got through several lanyards quite quickly over the years. Now, I had a lot of Richard shell knives back then, but I don't have any of those left. They're all long past. But the one knife I did have, which is also Richard's, I'm sure it says Rickards. Richards of Sheffield were actually a German firm. The Richards brothers, started their Sheffield business just before the Second World War, and of course Reichard wasn't such a popular name leading into the war, so they changed their name to Richards, and traded under that name and also under Reichard's in Solingen. But one of the knives that they made, and I think these were actually made in Solingen rather than Sheffield, but one of the knives they made and sold in the same places and same way as the shell knives was this. Now, these were sold, as were the shell knives, in sort of what you might call a general store, but newsagents, tobacconists, supermarkets, anywhere where the local shop, the village shop, the town shop. And again, in Doggetty Bay there was a wee shop called Tommy's, which was actually I think it was 3 or 4 shops run together. There was a sort of newsagents, tobacconist, sweet shop at the front, and then there were 2 further shops connected to it, which were a sort of supermarket where you could buy sort of ordinary general shopping. To be honest, in those days, I would say 90%, if not more, of my mother's shopping bag came from there. And my brother and I used to be sent up there to go and get the shopping. That was our job in the Scottish parlance, to get the messages. So you got there with the string bag and cut your fingers on the way home because the bag bit into your hand. And every so often, when we got a few pennies together, we'd buy a Richard's shell knife. And one day I managed to get together enough pennies to buy one of these. Now, it wasn't actually this one, because I used to throw it a lot, and the tang of the blade only goes to about maybe the throat of the wee picture of the stag here. Certainly not further than that. And I discovered that because I kept throwing it, and then it snapped, and it was just a few millimeters of the tang sticking out of the bottom bit of the blade. And in those days, it didn't really have sort of super glue and stuff, so I tried with various types of glue that I could get my hands on to stick it back together. I didn't have any epoxy or araldite or anything like that, so it never stuck on. It just ended up getting sticky and the handle kept falling off, so eventually I threw it away. But this was the first sheath knife I had, and I had this before I had the Passes Dirk, but even then I knew it wasn't the best knife in the world. But the only other knife I have from that era that I still have, I got when I was 10. basically my father left us when I was 10, and he left a briefcase, and my brother and I found the briefcase. It was under the stairs, and we managed to lever it open, and inside there we found a number of items that were of interest to 10 and 11-year-old boys. Some, shall we say, reading matter that my mother wouldn't have approved of, and though of course in those days it was very, shall we say, soft. But we also found 2 knives. Both had leather stacked handles, aluminium pommels, various brass and fibre spacers like this, but they had 2 different blade shapes. One had a 7-inch dagger blade, double-edged, which my brother immediately pounced on and said, "Oh, it's his." And the other was this. Now, this has, I can just get my little ruler out here, and almost 8-inch blade on it. Certainly, I always used to call it my 8-inch blade knife. And it's very close. You can't quite see it on the screen, so that's not very good. Right, there we go. Yeah. I always called it my 8-inch blade Bowie knife. And I say I got that when I was 10. Now, obviously my father didn't give it to me. We just borrowed it. And I certainly didn't tell my mother that I had it. But I did. And within a very short period of time, I was openly carrying it to go to the Scouts and things like that. And nobody ever said to me, "Are you sure you should have that?" I went to the Scouts from when I was 11, and we went camping almost immediately. And camping, you were allowed to carry a knife. You were encouraged to carry not a folding knife but a sheath knife. I think they probably expected that you would turn up with something more like this, but I turned up with this. Nobody ever questioned it. I used it for all sorts of stuff, from chopping to slicing. I remember carving a chicken with it once in a camping and cooking competition, but it was just used for anything and everything. Now, it's marked on here Sabre, and on the other side it has a maker's mark, which is J.H. Thompson, Sheffield, England. Now, one thing I have discovered over the years about these knives, and these in particular, is that the name on them isn't necessarily who actually made them. It may be who made the blade, it may be who finished the knife, it may be neither. But that's certainly the way it is. I think Ashley Harrison has a few of these blades, and I think they're not marked Arthur Wright, but it's just, I think it's just the way these things were sort of passed around. The little Messer system did mess with the way things were marked to some extent. This one was probably made in the 60s. It might have been made in the early 70s, but it was certainly around then. What I haven't got handy, because I put this on a display on the wall, is the sheath. And the sheath is shorter than the knife, so that this part of the blade sat on the stitching. There's no welt in the blade, and it had cut through the stitching, so the knife, the sort of bottom rivet in the sheath used to sit sort of around about here, and around about here, and this part of the blade used to stick out the bottom of the sheath. So I didn't really know what to do about it. I certainly didn't have any money, and I certainly didn't have any skill, so I wasn't going to make a new sheath. But there was a thing at the time for putting studs in belts, bracelets, leather jackets, if you had such a thing, not that I did. And you could buy the little studs in a shop called Brewer's, which is a shoe shop in Sandwich, and you bought them individually. I can't remember what the cost was, like 5p each or something. So I bought a whole lot, and then I made holes all the way around the sheath, and I put these studs all the way around, so the blade, instead of sitting on the stitching, was now sitting on these metal studs, which I thought was a better plan. And in some ways it was, because it meant the knife wasn't sticking out the bottom, being dangerous. But yeah, probably wasn't good for the blade. Now again, I never thought for a second about sharpening my knife. Just didn't occur to me that it was a thing. But one of the slightly older scouts, I mean a year or two older, there's a guy called Paul Scott. Him and his brother Nigel and their father Brian were all involved in the Scouts. And he had a little brother as well, whose name I can't remember, but quite a lot younger. But anyway, they, and Beryl as well was their mother. Paul had become an apprentice joiner, and we went on this camping trip to Luxembourg, and one of the things we used to do was carve totem poles. And I was heading off somewhere, and Paul asked me if he could borrow my knife to carve his totem pole. And so I gave him my knife, and of course he looked at the edge and said, you know, you couldn't cut butter with it. It was that blunt. And so he sharpened it, and he sharpened it properly. And when I came back from my little trip, it was actually, you know, razor sharp. Now, I'd never seen a sharp knife in my life. You know, just nobody had sharp knives at that time. Now, I've never actually sharpened it since, because I kind of stopped using it fairly soon after that. But it still has that same edge on it. It's been stropped a little bit, but I've never actually gone back and sharpened it, and it's still, to this day, it's still got a decent edge on it. Now, if I'd used it much, obviously it would have lost the edge, but I've got so many knives, and I've had so many knives in the interim period. It's almost as though I've kind of said, you know, if a knife gets blunt, I'll just buy a new one. It's not quite as bad as that, but it's not far off. So anyway, I've had this knife now for about 50 years. No, nearly 50 years. I got it when I was 10, and I'm 59 now, so 49 years. Next summer it'll be 50 years since I've had this knife. And you know, it's one of those, I'm inclined not to use it, because I was inclined to use and abuse it sufficiently so that it has a loose pommel, and has had a loose pommel since I don't know when. Ashley Harrison offered to refurbish it for me, and I was going to, but I just decided in the end not to, because I think it would lose some of its history. I mean, it used to have a shiny, polished blade. It could have a shiny, polished blade again, but considering how deep some of the rust pitting is in it, I think you'd lose quite a lot of the history in the amount of steel that you would have to remove. So I decided not to. Thank you for offering, but I just I think it's better to keep it the way that it is. So I made a display recently of some of my fixed blades. There was 16 fixed blades on a rack, and this one takes pride of place. Top left, it's the first one. There's 4 knives from my youth, 4 military knives, including one that Tobias gave me, and one that my grandfather gave me, one that my son-in-law gave me, and one that I bought. There's some bushcrafting knives that I have, and some camping knives that I have, of which really only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 have ever really had any use. The others are just I've bought and might have used once or twice. My grandfather's commander knife, I don't believe was ever actually used in anger, but it was certainly carried in field. So it was carried in Burma. He was in the RAF, but they were sending in flying boats to land on a lake of which I can't remember. But they were supporting the 111th, who were the second Chindit expedition, Operation Thursday in 1944. So at the same time as Imphal and Kohima were going on, he was flying a Sunderland flying boat in. They were landing on this lake, supporting the Chindits, who, by taking them food and ammunition and so forth and flying out their wounded. It was a big thing in Burma that they would get the wounded out as quickly as possible, because the first Chindit expedition under Wingate, they had to leave a number of their wounded behind. At least a dozen of them were shot by their own, by the British officers, because they couldn't get them out, and handing them over to the Japanese was absolutely a fate worse than death. I mean, the Japanese would have bayoneted them if they were lucky. They might have tortured them first, and they certainly would have displayed their bodies as a warning to both the British and to their own Japanese soldiers, that they didn't want to get captured by the British, because the British would want revenge for what they'd done to them. So that was anyway, that was where he was doing his bit. Now granted, he was flying in and flying out, so there was a big risk of being shot down, but other than that, they didn't have the privations that the Chindits had to suffer. Anyway, we're 80 years on from VJ Day last month, and I don't think anybody bothered to remember about all the things that these people did in Burma. They've forgotten army and remained so. Anyway, enough of my wittering. I told you there was too much inane wittering on YouTube these days, and there's my contribution to it. So I just wanted to show you, based on what Paddy had shown yesterday, my earliest surviving knives. None of the Richard's shell knives survived. I did have a couple of Swiss Army knife knockoffs. They were probably better than many of the Swiss Army knives of the day, because they were made in Japan. But there we are. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that, please give it a like. Think about subscribing. If you do, ring the notifications bell. You'll not see the videos otherwise. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.